When you care about current affairs, it's on the Oshow.
Welcome to the Oshow, Canada's current affairs show with strong opinions. And I told you the last time we were together that I'd see you on the other side of the American election. And it is so much worse on this side than I ever imagined. Possibly for the first time in U.S. history, a U.S. president not only controls the legislative branch of government and the executive branch, but also now the judicial branch, because Trump, for the first time as a president, is unfettered. He can do whatever the hell he wants. And if you've been paying attention, he's doing a lot of bad things already. Well, rather than sink into despondency and despair and be weary from the woe that I feel is coming to our country as well, I choose as my guest today to stand up and fight, to scream from the mountaintops, if you will, that this is not just an American problem. This is a Canadian problem. And as my guest Charlie Angus said in his parliamentary response to the Trump election, it's the time of the monsters. Welcome back to the Oshow, Charlie Angus. It's good to see you. I wish the circumstances were not so dire, my friend, but I'm glad you're here.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I wish they weren't so dire, but I think we've been watching this coming. This has been like a slow-moving hurricane, and it's been coming at us. And we just thought it would ride over top, and we would go back and carry on. And there is no carrying on. We have to adapt now. And this, the line, it's been sticking with me for some time in the lead up to Trump's election, and then once he won, it really zeroed in. It was Antonio Gramsci's line that a world is struggling to be born. But we are in the time of monsters. And I think that that's the only way to look at the world around us. And so we have to adapt, and we have to decide, what are we going to do? And for me, cynicism is a luxury I just don't have the time for. And none of us have the time for.
Right. And it's been fascinating to watch the Canadian response. Some people, of course, are trying to say, oh, it's just America, Trump derangement syndrome, blah, blah, blah. But that narrative is not just inaccurate. It's actually deleterious. It's deliberate. It's trying to get Canadians to under-assess the threat. It's trying to get us to believe that because it's Trump being Trump and the US is the US, somehow we have an invisible cultural wall between us. Somehow the longest undefended border in the world is defended by some conventions of decency and neighborliness. That's all bullshit. And it's bullshit because we're already hearing echoes of Manifest Destiny. We heard the Tucker Carlson and crew at their CPAC conferences for years talking about how Canada was being run by communists and should be invaded. We heard Trump in California on the campaign, Charlie, muse about the Canadian faucet of water that just needed to be turned on to help with California's drought issues. We don't have to be hyperbolic or hysterical to see the threat that is coming very quickly to Canada. Can you elaborate for our viewers and our listeners what exactly is happening in Canada?
Yeah, and I would say that I think Canada as a nation is actually much more vulnerable than we we've even considered. Because what is a nation? A nation is a story. And Canada's story is pretty we all grew up on Canadian history. That's boring. There's not much to it. Our story is that we weren't Americans. Right? From coast to coast to coast, well, we weren't Americans, and so we were more decent. That's okay as a national story in good times, but when you have what's happening in Alberta with the UCP government running absolute rage and disinformation and blaming Justin Trudeau for everything that's happened, well, what's the story then of the nation? Is the story of the nation that Alberta should have its own pension fund, that Alberta should celebrate CO2 emissions continually rising because it's good for the atmosphere and good for life? We have allowed our sense of the nation, we've been very lazy about it. And so we are susceptible, and we are super susceptible to the undermining of discussion, of democracy. Elon Musk being the champion of Trump makes absolute sense. I mean, it's the digital giants that rewired our lives. They rewired how we think. They rewired our democracy, and it is absolutely toxic. And so we now think that toxic interactions with each other is normal. So then, is that the Canadian thing? I mean, at least Americans have a long history of fighting with each other. They're no strangers to it. They're no strangers to conflict. We aren't very good at it, and so we are super susceptible. And I think you reached out to me this week because I called out Pierre Poilievre's use of Remembrance Day, of all things, to just lie and try and divide people. And you realize that the things that in Canada we tiptoed around and considered sacred, they aren't sacred to these bastards. They don't care. They will use Remembrance Day just like they urinated on the statue of the unknown, the tomb of the unknown soldier, and danced on it. And you didn't hear a peep out of the National Post or any of those right-wing newspapers that have got a poor Aboriginal kid had even gone close to the statue, which has never happened. Never, 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 never. I've seen anarchist marches. I've seen Indigenous marches. They would never denigrate the cenotaph. But when right-wing yabos, the White Lives Matter crowd do it, you don't see them getting called out. You don't see anyone calling out Poilievre for his disgraceful comments on Remembrance Day. Or you don't see the national right-wing media calling out, wait, why is it that it's not that you're refusing to get a security clearance. Is it that you can't get a security clearance? We are very susceptible right now.
Yeah, we're susceptible and we're seduced by it. And I think one of the things that's important in this conversation, because I've given it a tremendous amount of thought, I was lucky enough to be in Mexico at a wedding during the election. I think it kept me from the edge a little bit more, being in a tropical paradise. But you know what? It is so dark what's coming out of the US, the cabinet appointments by Trump, the sense of unfettered power for those of us who understand how the US government system works. Hopefully there'll be a midterm correction in 2 years, but we don't even know if Trump will allow that. He has no reason to allow anything to thwart his power or his agenda. And I know deep in the souls of Canadians, we're hoping that the guy we grew up with on The Apprentice, etc., is not really that bad. But the fact of the matter is we have no way of stopping him if he is. We have benefited tremendously, Charlie, from having the world's biggest military in history be our nice neighbor. We've benefited from the Reagan-esque concept of the shining city on the hill welcoming all, to hope that our neighbor would never become nativist and fascist. Well, we are now in that space. And for people who say Maple MAGA is an exaggeration, and I heard someone with a big account on X say to me yesterday, well, Laura, we're going to have a leader who puts Canadians first. That exact language is the language of America first. It's a fascist trope. It's something that should alarm all of us, and it is coming in hot and fast. Now, when I saw your post, you called Poilievre a liar first because he suggested incorrectly that there was going to be a ban on prayers during the Remembrance Day celebrations. It was an outright lie. He's not interested in honoring the war. He's interested in starting culture wars because it worked in the US. And then you call them an asshat because in his comments about Remembrance Day, he put in one of his stupid slogans from his campaign, just showing how shallow and peevish he is as a politician. But I want to get out of the politics around his personality because I think there are forces so much greater than Poilievre. Whether you like him, excuse him, see him as just an opportunist, as whatever, the Milton of Canadian politics, the reality is the same people who pushed those digital gods, as you talked about, the Elon Musk, etc., the Russian propaganda machine, they are already operating in Canada. We saw it during the blockade in Ottawa, the occupation, as you alluded to, Charlie, and I see it constantly on X. I'm really glad that Blue Sky is such a bombing environment. I mean, it's just popping now. It's blown up in the last week because we're moving a lot of our conversations to a safer place. But the reality is, it's already here. And whether Canada has a strong sense of national identity or not, even if we think we do or not, like you argue, we are already stewing in the fetid stew of autocracy here and the language around it, and we don't even know it.
Well, the issue is that, and I've been thinking about this issue for some time, and I've written a number of pieces on it. Can democracy survive in a time of absolute toxic disinformation? And we are now just starting to wire AI into it. Democracy is a fragile thing, and its fragility was hidden because of the old sort of gentleman's agreement of that we would all respect the rule of law, we would all respect Parliament and its traditions, in the same way that the Americans were very naive. They're checks and balances, and then you had January 6th, and suddenly you didn't have the rule of law anymore, and now we have this absolute creeper that's going to be named as Attorney General. When you don't respect the rule of law, all things become possible. This is the time of monsters, and I think that Canadian democracy is super susceptible. And we've seen it. We've seen the toxic rage. The first time I saw it was in 2015 when the Bloc did their pipeline. They had the black pipeline, and out of the pipeline came this big black oil glob, and that oil glob was a Muslim woman's face, and they were playing that the NDP were going to support oil and Muslims. And in the middle of that campaign, it was during the horrific story of the little Syrian boy. It was the first time I saw our phone lines were being overrun by race anger. And that was all online disinformation. That was the first time we saw how fast online disinformation worked and shifted voters and made people that had never mentioned a racist comment before talk racist, that I heard, at least in public. Then we saw the convoy. And ordinary, like little old lady grandma wrote me and said, well, if the journalists weren't lying, they wouldn't have to worry about getting threatened and beaten up. It's like, gee, grandma, is that where we're at? So we saw that shift in people. And we're at a point now, and this is, Polyev is not a clown. They know what they're doing, and they're trying to divide us. And we have to be aware. We have to call it out. And we have to realize that the gentleman's codes that we thought were there aren't there. Mainstream media is badly weakened. It was no accident that he went after CTV in such a hard way. CBC tiptoes around him because they're terrified he's going to shut them down. So when you don't have media challenging, that's one of the fundamentals of democracy. We have our parliament is now absolutely shut down by conservative gong show. Then they tell Canadians that politics don't work. So they're trying to run on rage. I personally don't think that rage will win in the end. I think it's a tiresome thing to be rageful, but you're not going to win by being nice, and you're not going to win by pretending that it's okay and that we're all ordinary Canadians. You have to get a new strategy.
Well, let me push back on that because, yes, rage is exhausting, but it literally is like jet fuel in politics with social media, which, as you know, the algorithms bend towards outrage. So when we look at what worked in the US, it was a simple narrative against immigrants, against trans people, and fear-mongering around crime stats. We're seeing the exact same three pain points being exploited by Polyev de rigueur, right? And the culture war rage, there is unlimited amount of energy for that because people are upset rightly about the cost of eggs in the economy. The whole world suffered post-pandemic inflation. It was predicted and it happened, and incumbents have been thrown out on their butts around the world because of it. Trump was able to take those economic realities and associate it with the scapegoating of marginalized communities and turn that into a very, very powerful, toxic stew. And that is happening in Canada. It's happening at an accelerated rate since Trump's election last week. And I don't believe that the arguments to quote Claire McCaskill towards our better angels are going to work. I mean, you talked about the fact that we're not good at fighting with each other in Canada. We're too nice or whatever the stereotype is, or we're too trusting or however we want to put it into context. If we don't learn clearly that rage actually works as a political tool and that Canadians are just as prepared to accept that messaging of economic opportunity at the expense of the others that we fear, I think we're fools, Charlie. I'm not calling you a fool, but I think we're fools if we think that somehow our decency as a society and our repudiation of Trump is in any way going to slow the roll of Polyev and Maple MAGA.
Well, no, I think the issue is that we can't we can't write it off as Poilievre's just being a bad boy. I mean, that's kind of like the national posting when Poilievre does something really, that's Pierre. And it's like, again, that's the enabling factor, right? It has to be called out, and we have to stand up, and we need voices who are not afraid to speak up. I mean, the amount of intimidation and threat I get for calling this stuff out, like when I called out Pierre Poilievre for refusing to distance himself from Alex Jones, my daughter's photos were on X within an hour. That's the intimidation. This week I got off X. Yeah. I've been thinking about it for a long time, and people were like, what the frick are you doing there? Let's get off. And I thought, okay, so maybe I'll have X thousand less followers, but we got to start it. We got to build it at levels that we can start to reclaim our democracy, and not being in the rage room. Like, why am I wasting my day fighting bots?
So can I just speak to that for a second? Because I think that's critically important, right? So being that I don't work for anyone other than my own company, I built my X following with serious followers based on just relentless calling out of politics and corruption at all levels, right? It's a very valuable account, and I've used it for many years to successfully promote a lot of important causes that I care about, homelessness, etc. The idea of leaving a platform that I've curated for so long is a little bit terrifying and frustrating. So what I'm doing is I am trying to help a mass migration from X over to Blue Sky as I myself move and shift some of my energies to Blue Sky to build that platform. So I'm glad you jumped over. I follow you on Blue Sky, and I've seen the Blue Sky stats go through the roof this week. Twitter stats are hurting because, like you, spending your day fighting for causes you believe in and for Canadian values that we all thought were permanent is exhausting. But fighting against paid Russian bots every time I mention Ford or Poilievre, is a waste of my time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I'm just saying, from a PR comm strategy for our listeners and viewers, you can still find me on X. I'm not about to step out of the fight, but I am also trying to build a robust other environment. I feel kind of like, I don't know about you, but in the 80s, when we were looking for a party on a Friday night, my friends and I, without social media, would go to 7-Eleven in Winnipeg, and we'd hang out until we found out where the parties were at. I feel like everyone who's like-minded is saying, like, where is the party at? Where is the conversation going to be worth my time? So at the moment, I feel like that's over at Blue Sky and Instagram and everywhere else. But I just want to point to that, because the fight is being fought in social media. I truly believe that. When we look at Kamala's campaign with 900,000 volunteers in Pennsylvania, door knocking at 10 times the rate of Trump, had almost no impact compared the ground game compared to what was happening on the social media systems where these algorithms are driving people towards their own, confirmation bias. So I think it's important, and not just because I'm a podcast now, but because having worked in mainstream media and seen it being decimated, the conversation is online, be it on podcasts or on these social platforms. So I'm really glad you're here. But tell me also, in addition to the book you've got coming out where you talk about, your memories and I'm sure have pearls of wisdom, what is it that you want our viewers and our clips get? Hundreds of thousands of views. We are a clip show ultimately, although we have listeners and downloaders. But what is it that you want our viewers and our listeners to do, Charlie? Like, beyond our just, issue identification here today, what do you want them to do? What can we do?
Well, that's a great question. I woke up this morning. It's my birthday, by the way.
Oh, happy birthday. I'm
Thank
so
you.
glad you're spending it with the pod.
I'm spending it with you. And I thought, what am I going to offer on my birthday? And I realized that I would love to despair, but we can't. Despair is the other side of rage. You rage and then you despair. Like I said, I don't believe that cynicism is a luxury we can afford. I mean, the planet is on fire, and we are in the time of monsters. So what I'm suggesting might seem crazy. I think we have to rewire our brains. Our brains were wired. And in my book, Dangerous Memory, the new book is coming out, that's just come out, I talk about how we opened our whole world to the digital tech giants who promised us that we were going to live in freedom and liberty, and we were all going to become more intelligent. And what has it done? It's made us dumber. Daniel Smith couldn't chase after chemtrails if her population wasn't much dumber than it was 20 years ago. Trump couldn't have gotten elected unless the American people had become dumber. How did we become dumber? We rewired our brains. So I'm suggesting to everybody, at the end of the week when you get on your phone or on your screen that you're down 15%, is that like Google trying to shame us? My thing is, number one, okay, rewire your brain. So every week, piss off Google and have them say you're down 36%. What are you doing in that 36%? Why don't you read? Okay, maybe you don't want to read. Learn to play mandolin, cook, go outside. Do not doom scroll, because doom scrolling is not going to save the world. So that's number one. Number two, and I know this is going to sound really weak, but we have to re-engage at the local level.
Yes.
Because things that we took for granted, the whole web of community has disintegrated in this world of 24/7, on. So join the library board, join the school board. That's where the right wing go. Help out at the Lions Club. Put on a funny little vest and join the Elks Club. Or what. I don't care what you join, but it's about making connection with people who aren't in your circle, because we only live in our circles. And when you start to do that, you start to repair community. We have to repair community because nobody else is going to help us. Number three, what you have to do is you have to make that little bit of the world around you better than it was. I know this all sounds like I'm freaking the political Martha Stewart here, but the planet is burning. And if all you do is look at the burning planet, there's nothing you can do, but the world around you can. And number four is you got to call the shit out. That's, to be unafraid, to call shit out. When shit's happening, there's a genocide going on. It is a genocide. Call it for what it is. And if you do those four things, you're going to start to notice little things that are being done that people do that you think, well, that's crazy, but maybe it might work. And I write about that in Dangerous Memory. I write about how in the 80s, people literally changed the world by doing crazy things. Like 4 mothers in Wales who sat around a kitchen table and thought, if the cruise missiles hit here, or the Russian SS-20s, we won't get time to get to the school to save our children. What do? They walked 120 miles with their children to the Greenham Common military base, and they got laughed at the whole way. The next year, they put 30,000 women at Greenham Common. The year after, they had 70,000 women standing outside Greenham Common. And the reason that story matters is Mikhail Gorbachev told the world that the reason he realized he could negotiate an end to the Cold War was that the women of Greenham Common made him realize there were people on the other side of the big wall. And we're on the anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. It fell without a shot. And it wasn't Reagan. It was punk rock kids in East Berlin. It was ordinary people. So that's the thing, is like, we don't create mass movements by creating mass movements. We create mass movements by getting engaged with people. That's my spiel. That's my birthday message.
Damn, that was quite a gift. You almost have me crying. You know what? It is a time for punk. It is a time for localized action and calling out the powers that be. It reminds me of the Mandela quote, it's always impossible until it happens, right?
Yeah.
And it seemed impossible, the Cold War in those years, and it seems impossible now to mount any kind of opposition to the growing autocracy in the Western world. I mean, let's face it, still, the US president, since the Cold War, runs the world. They are a singular superpower. They have the biggest economy and the biggest military the world has ever seen. And him at the top of it is a dire threat to humanity and to our planet. Despair is the natural human response to something that terrible. However, like you said, the right wing, when they were despairing, the civil rights movement started organizing in their local school boards, in their local city councils, and they built up the power that they now are celebrating in our faces today. We need to organize locally, get offline unless we're doing something very proactive online, and make sure that we are building community. You talk about our bubbles. I can tell you something that changed my family at the molecular level was starting to volunteer with the line of people suffering in hunger and homelessness in Hamilton. Yeah. I did it initially as a journalistic curiosity, and then ended up realizing that I would rather be, there's nowhere I'd rather be than with the line of people suffering in hunger and homelessness in Hamilton.
Yeah.
I did it as initially as a journalistic curiosity, and then ended up realizing that I would rather be. There's nowhere I'd rather be. And if you need a reason to get out of bed and fight, fight for others who don't have the option to fight, right? And that includes fighting against governments who are, whether it's Alberta or Ford or Polyev or whoever is putting in policies that are punitive to the poor, policies that are hurting the marginalized, who are stigmatizing and weaponizing and literally using trans people and immigrants who have done nothing to anyone, using them to make us afraid and make us angry and make us resentful and make us go towards autocracy. I really, really appreciate you sharing your birthday with us, sharing your wisdom, all your years there in Ottawa. And Charlie, I hope we'll have you back on the Oshow, but I just want to say, on your birthday, you're spending your time, sir. I hope having a pint or whatever else you're going to do. But
oh, yeah.
Yeah, good. I'd be lying if I said this is just coffee. But I think it's really important that you're also giving Canadians four steps to stay engaged in the right fight and to do what is necessary. I mean, we just don't have the luxury anymore of
we don't. And to end on that, as the MP for 20 plus years, what I've learned is that to trust that the political system is going to fix it for us.
Right.
It's not going to happen. And that's how we got Trump. And Canada, we have to restore, and we have to start rebuilding at the ground, at neighborhood, family, community, city. We have to take that back, because that's how the toxicity got in. It got in through all those holes that appeared. We have to start closing those holes. And you can only do that through community. And then we have to, and while doing that, we got to call the shit out.
And I have to tell you one last thought as a parent, because you mentioned your daughter. All day I talk to my kids about this stuff because they get it all day through TikTok, right? There's nothing that I bring up to them that they're not already aware of. There's no video they've seen, no crap they haven't heard. Yeah. And for them to be living in a world where you've got guys now in their high schools saying, your body, my choice, and climate deniers running the world, it is for them devastating. But what I found from them is that not only are they able to stop it at their level when they see it, to call it out online with their friends, to call it out in posts, to stand up in class and say that's not accurate, that's not true, that's not fair. But they also need to believe that they are the generation that is going to change it because of all the things that we have done. And so I think beyond just getting engaged in community and following your 4 steps, talking to our teenagers and our children and empowering them to make better choices and different choices and to be able to stand up for what they believe early and often, I think is critical as well. So thank you so much, Charlie.
Thank you so much. Alrighty.
When you care about current affairs, it's on the Oshow. And when you want to get clear what's going on here, it's on the Oshow. If you like to stay in the know, tune yourself into the Oshow. It's the Oshow. Laura Babcock's the Oshow. With a lot of great guests, she puts them to the test on the Oshow. There's no doubt they'll be calling them out on the Oshow. Stand for something or fall for it all. Ontario, hear the call on the Oshow. It's a podcast, the Oshow. Laura Babcock's the Oshow. Stay informed with the Oshow.